Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports and Football video, and today I'm going over my Week 14 Power Rankings for the 2023 NFL season. It's crazy that we're already in Week 14. A lot of close games this week. This was probably one of the most competitive weeks of the season, so let's get right into it. First off, we have the dumpster fire, as always. We have the Carolina Panthers at 32, the New England Patriots at 31, the Washington Commanders at 30, and the New York Jets at 29. The Panthers and Patriots, I believe, have been in the same spot for 3 weeks in a row. Carolina's been at 32 for basically the entirety of the season, other than the 1 week where they won a game. The Patriots lost this week by a score of 6-0 to the Chargers. This is officially the 3rd week in a row the Patriots have lost by allowing less than 10 points or less. And we're the first team to do that since 1938, to lose 3 games in a row while allowing 10 or less points. It's a very impressive feat. I'm very proud of our team effort of doing that. And Carolina lost another game to Tampa. They only lost by 3. They put up a good effort, but they couldn't win. At number 30, we have the Washington Commanders, and at 29, we have the New York Jets. The Jets have finally returned to the dumpster fire after a very strong start to the season. The Jets started off 4-3. They are now, I believe, 4-8. So yeah, they've lost a lot of games in a row. And it hasn't been very tough competition. They've lost those games to fairly easy opponents, and when they've played hard opponents, they've lost like 40-0. As for the Washington Commanders, they started off fairly strong as well. They started off, I believe, 2-2, but since then they've lost most of their games, and I don't think they've had a win other than New England since October 15th. Moving on to bad. We have the Chicago Bears at 28, with the New York Giants at 27, the Tennessee Titans at 26, the Buccaneers at 25, and the Cardinals at 24. The Bears are up 1 spot. Since my last Power Rankings, they did beat the Vikings, since technically that was before Monday Night Football. And then this week they lost, so they kind of balanced out. So they're at +1 positions for right now. The Giants are at 27. They lost 1 spot. The Titans also lost 1 spot, and so did Tampa. All of them lost those spots to the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals moved up 6 positions this week. Kyler Murray is back, and he's better than ever. Maybe not better than ever, but he's back, and he's better than Joshua Dobbs. So the Cardinals are up 6 spots. They've won 2 of their last 4 games. And they had a very strong victory against the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, commanding win 24-10. Their offense is looking good. They're looking better. Obviously, they're not going to be contenders, but Kyler is going to be fighting for his job over the last few weeks. And I could see them finishing with 5 or 6 wins. Tampa beat the Panthers by 2, so they got up to 5 wins, which is pretty good, but they started off way stronger than that. Tennessee lost in a very close game against the Colts. It was a close game. Derrick Henry has been playing a lot better recently. I think that they've found a good balance between him and Tyjae Spears. I think it's a good backfield duo, and it's giving Henry some rest, which is something that he needs after the last couple of seasons. And the Giants have not played this week, but the Cardinals just passed them in the Power Rankings. So yeah. Moving on to mid, we have the Raiders at 23 and the Chargers at 22. Neither of these teams moved because the Raiders didn't play this week, and the Chargers basically didn't play this week. The Chargers' score was 6-0 against the Patriots, and the Raiders didn't play. So neither of them moved at all. The Chargers game was horrendous, obviously. Justin Herbert, you didn't even notice that Justin Herbert was on the field for the most part. It was just kind of some guy that was throwing footballs for the Chargers. You couldn't tell it was him. You couldn't tell who anyone was other than Keenan Allen, because Keenan Allen's everywhere. It was just a horrendous game. I didn't drop the Chargers for it because they technically won, but they definitely didn't gain any positions. Moving on, we have figuring stuff out. We have the Bengals at 21, the Saints at 20, and the Atlanta Falcons at 19. The Bengals have not moved this week since they were on a bye week, so they stayed at the same position as last week. The Saints at 20 moved down 1 position from last week. They were at 19, and I had the Falcons at 20. I swapped them this week. Last week, the Falcons did beat the Saints to claim the number 1 spot in their division, but because it was in Atlanta and because the Saints have been better for most of the season, I kept the Saints above the Falcons last week. This week, the Falcons were able to get a victory against the Jets, and the Saints lost to the Lions. It was a very close game. The Saints put up a good fight, and honestly, the Saints game was almost more impressive than the Falcons game, considering the Saints were against one of the best teams in the league, and Atlanta was against one of the worst teams in the league. But now that Atlanta's a full game ahead of the Saints and they have the tiebreaker over them, I'm putting them tentatively above them for right now. But if the Saints win in New Orleans, then I'll be putting the Saints back over the Falcons. Overall, both of these teams have gone up and down this season. Derek Carr just got injured this week, so we'll either see him again next week if he's healthy, or we'll see Jameis Winston. I'm not entirely sure, but both of these teams have been very up and down. Right now, the Falcons are more up, but you never know what's going to happen. Moving on to somewhat confused one. We only have, we have the Seahawks at 18, the Vikings at 17, the Browns at 16, the Steelers at 15, and the Rams at 14. A lot of teams dropping in this category except for the Rams. Seattle's down to 18 after being, I believe, 5 or 6 at some point this season. They've lost a considerable number of games over the last 6 or 7 weeks. They're losing more games than they're winning recently, and it's because they're playing a tough schedule. They're playing a hard schedule, but they're not winning any of the tough games. And because of that, Seattle can't be considered a legitimate contender anymore, in my opinion. They keep losing games. They're not playing well against good opponents. They did play well against Dallas for the most part, but they weren't able to win, most like their other games against tough opponents. So Seattle has dropped down to 18. The Vikings are at 17. They've lost 2 games in a row since their winning streak. They haven't played this week, but they lost to the Bears last week, and they lost to Denver the week before. So they had a 5-game winning streak. I was putting them up, but now they've lost 2 games in a row. It's kind of tough. The Browns are at 16. They've dropped 5 positions from last week, and the Steelers have also dropped 5 positions from last week. Both of these teams lost surprising games. The Steelers lost to the Cardinals, and the Browns lost to the Rams. The Rams have now beaten 3 teams in a row. They went from 3-6 to 6-6. Part of that's because of Cooper Kupp's return, but part of that's because of Kyren Williams' return. Kyren Williams had a phenomenal game last week, and then this week he played very well again. Having their full, complete roster has been huge for the Rams recently, and their massive win over Cleveland this week was huge for them as well. They're up to 6-6. They're beating good teams. They look strong, and I can see the Rams being a serious contender coming up. As for the Browns and the Steelers, both of them have lost their starting quarterback. Mitchell Trubisky went out injured this week. Mitchell Trubisky came in this week for Kenny Pickett, and this week Joe Flacco came in for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I think that the Joe Flacco change is an improvement, but I need to see him play well before I can move the Browns back up. As for the Steelers, I think Mitch Trubisky could arguably be an improvement too, but again, I need to see him play before I can move them back up. Moving on, we have somewhat confused number 2. This has a lot more teams moving up. We have the Packers at 13, the Colts at 12, the Bills at 11, the Broncos at 10, and the Texans at 9. I think there's an argument to be made that Green Bay could be all the way up at number 10. They beat the Chiefs this week, and they beat the Lions last week. Jordan Love is looking like he did at the beginning of the season. He's looking strong. He's looking consistent. He's looking competitive. And the Packers look like a competitive football team. I think that they're going to continue to climb in the ranks. They're at their minimum right now. If they lose next week, they're not going to drop much, if any. They're mostly on their way up. If they win next week, they're just going to keep adding on those wins, keep moving up the ladder. The Colts are doing that as well with Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew has played fairly decently. He hasn't played all world or anything, but the Colts are winning games with him. They're 7-5. They were 4-5 at some point, so they've won 3 games in a row. They're looking good, and they don't look like contenders. I think the Packers look more like contenders than the Colts do, but the Colts look like they're a team that can make the playoffs and do something. The Bills are at 11. They did not play this week, so they basically stay in the same spot, but they moved up because Either Cleveland or the Steelers moved below them. They both moved below them. Houston moved above them. The Broncos lost one position this week with their very close, tight loss to the Texans. They almost came back and won it, but Russ threw a pick in the end zone. And then obviously Houston beat the Broncos. Houston has been very strong recently. They haven't had the strongest schedule in the world, which is why they're only at number 9, but they have won a lot of games. They've leveled out, and CJ Stroud is looking like the front runner for Rookie of the Year. Arguably one of the best rookie seasons by a quarterback ever. Moving on to the strong contenders, and this is a category where we've had a lot of changes, unlike usual. We have the Lions at number 8, we have the Chiefs at number 7, we have the Dolphins at number 6, and we have the Jaguars at number 5. The Lions did get a win this week over the Saints, 33-28. It was a close game, but for the most part, the Lions dominated. They controlled the beginning of the game. The Saints orchestrated a comeback, but the Lions were able to fend it off, and they were able to score enough points to win the game. That being said, coming off of a loss to the Packers, I would have liked to see a more impressive game by them, but they still played well enough to get the win, so they basically just stayed in the same spot. There's a massive drop-off, in my opinion, between the Lions and the Texans at this point. The Texans obviously are the only team in the previous category that could jump up to this elite level, but for right now, there's a big cutoff between this group and the next group. Kansas City is 8-4. They lost this week, so they are a game behind the Lions. But I have dropped them 3 spots from their position at number 4 last week for their loss to the Packers. I would have had them drop below the Lions, but both the Lions and the Chiefs lost to Green Bay, so I think it's fair to keep Kansas City above them for now. Kansas City has not looked like themselves this season. They haven't looked phenomenal, but they've looked pretty decent, and for the most part, they've looked like they could be contenders. And they've won a lot of strong games. They beat the Jaguars, they beat the Dolphins. They did lose to the Lions the first week of the season, but since that game, they've looked very consistent. They did beat both the Jaguars and the Dolphins, but those games were a long time ago. The Dolphins game is more recent, but I put the Jaguars and the Dolphins ahead of Kansas City just because they've been more consistent recently. The Miami Dolphins have won a lot of games in a row after starting 5-3. And although they still have yet to beat a competitive team, they're still a more consistent football team than Kansas City. They have a better offense overall, and I think that they have more chances to do well in the playoffs. As for Jacksonville, they really have only had one bad game since week 3. They started off 1-2. They're now 9-3. They've won 8 of their last 9 games. Their only bad loss being to the 49ers, and they ran into that juggernaut after the 49ers lost their 3 games in a row, and they wanted revenge. So I think that the Jaguars just got unlucky. They got demolished by the juggernaut, so they are at number 5. And moving on to the NFL's elite, we have the Cowboys at 4, the Ravens at 3, the Eagles at 2, and the 49ers at 1. Yes, the Cowboys have finally made it back to the elite. The Cowboys were in the elite for the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season before they lost their first game. And since then, they really haven't beaten any competitive teams. This week, they played a very strong game. And Dak Prescott has had 20 touchdowns over the last 6 weeks. They beat Seattle this week. Obviously, Seattle is no longer a contender, in my opinion. But Dak Prescott has looked phenomenal. He had 6 touchdowns in the first 6 games, and he's had 20 touchdowns in the last 6 games. That's a huge improvement. The Dallas offense is the biggest issue I had with Dallas this season was that their offense was not looking like their defense. Their defense was all world. Their offense was terrible. So this week, Dallas has proved to me over the last 5 to 6 weeks that their offense can be as consistent as their defense, and they do look like an elite team once again. The Ravens are at number 3. They didn't play this week, but they did move down 1 position from last week when they were at number 2, simply because the 49ers moved above them. Now, for 1 and 2, we have the Eagles and the 49ers. The 49ers did surpass the Eagles this week, even though they are 1 game behind them. The 49ers are 9-3, the Eagles are 10-2, but the 49ers beat the Eagles in Philadelphia. I know Jalen Hurts did go out for some point in the game, but the 49ers won 42-19. And so the thing is, the difference between the 49ers and every other team in the league is that the 49ers not only beat good teams, they demolish good teams. They beat the Jaguars 34-6 or something like that. They beat the Eagles this week 42-19. They beat Dallas by nearly 40 points, 30-something points. I don't remember the exact scores of all these games, but the 49ers have demolished some of their tough opponents. Yeah, they lost 3 games in a row in the middle of the season, but no team's going to be perfect. They're not going to win every game. The 49ers proved this week that they are the best team in the league. They just need to be a little bit more consistent, but this was a phenomenal statement game for the 49ers. So, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.